Hello students, welcome to the lecture on financial plans of a new enterprise. And after the lecture we will be able to learn the following objectives. Understand the planning of a new enterprise. Explain the financial plan. Discuss about estimation of fixed capital requirements. Describe the estimation of working capital requirements. Understand the sources of finance. Explain international financial institutions. Discuss venture capital funding. Let's start with a brief introduction of financial plans of a new enterprise. Each source of finance has different eligibility criteria and focus, so it is important to find the one that best matches one's business circumstances. The type of finance available will be dependent on legal structure and the amount of money needed. In order to approach a funder, a voluntary and community group needs to be properly established with a formal constitution and a bank account. When approaching fundraising, the clearer one is about what one wants to achieve, aims, and how one is going to achieve them, objectives, the easier it will become to identify how much support one is going to need. Let us now take a look at planning of a new enterprise. An enterprise plan is a written description of one's business future. That is, all there is to it, a document that describes what one plans to do and how one plans to do it. Enterprise plans can help perform a number of tasks for those who write and read them. They are used by investment-seeking entrepreneurs to convey their vision to potential investors. There are three primary parts to an enterprise plan. The first is the business concept, where one discusses the industry, business structure, particular product or service, and how to plan to make the enterprise a success. The second is the marketplace section, which describe and analyze potential customers, who and where they are, what makes them buy, and so on. Here, it also describes the competition and how one will position herself to beat it. Finally, the financial section contains the income and cash flow statement, balance sheet, and other financial ratios, such as break-even analysis. This part may require help from an accountant and a good spreadsheet software program. The enterprise plan. Depending on what one is using it for, a useful enterprise plan can be any length, from a scrawl on the back of an envelope to an especially detailed plan describing a complex enterprise more than 100 pages. The purpose of the plan also determines its length. If one wants to use the plan to seek millions of money in seed capital to start a risky venture, one may have to do a lot of explaining and convincing. Startups. The classical enterprise plan is an entrepreneur seeking funds to help start a new venture. Business owners find plans useful at all stages of their company's existence, whether they are seeking financing or trying to figure out how to invest a surplus. Established firms seeking help. A plan may be seen as a valuable tool to be used to convey the mission and prospects of the business to customers, suppliers, or others. Plan and updating checklist. A new financial period is about to begin. One may update the plan annually, quarterly, or even monthly if the industry is a fast-changing one. One need financing or additional financing. Lenders and other financiers need an updated plan to help them make financing decisions. There's a significant market change. Shifting client tastes, consolidation trends among customers, and altered regulatory climates can trigger a need for plan updates. The firm develops or is about to develop a new product, technology, service, or skill. If the business has changed a lot since one wrote his/her plan the first time around, it is time for an update. One has had a change in management. New managers should get fresh information about the business and goals. One's old plan does not seem to reflect reality anymore. Maybe one did a poor job last time. Maybe things have just changed faster than his or her expectation. But if the plan seems irrelevant, redo it. Here we will discuss about financial plan. Financial planning, an outcropping of the services typically provided by a stockbroker or account executive, include investment advice, insurance sales, retirement planning, and various other assessments and planning to meet financial goals. Cash flow statement. In order to determine the cash flow in an organization, one has to consider factors like financing, investment, and core operations. The current operations taking place in an organization and the changes in the balance sheet which occur due to these operations are recorded in the cash flow statements. Working capital. Working capital is the difference between current assets and current liabilities, and it is the amount of liquefiable capital available to a company to build itself. It does not mean that this capital will always be positive. There are times when it can be negative, and this happens when the current assets are less than the current liabilities. Elements of working capital. Cash. This is probably the most essential element or component of working capital. Without cash, a business cannot run smoothly. Accounts receivable. Every business has some debtors, people, or other businesses that owe them money. These are called accounts receivable. Inventory or stock. The inventory in a company is half of its current assets and hence needs more monitoring than everything else. The level of the inventory or stock needs to be at a particular level. The rate of turnover also needs to be monitored closely. Accounts payable. It is normal for businesses to owe money to their suppliers and other businesses. This is because sometimes the amounts to be paid are large and will need some time to be paid off. It is important to track these amounts, also called accounts payable. Outstanding expenses and payable taxes. These are certain outstanding expenses that the company has and that will reflect on the capital. Vertical and horizontal analysis. In vertical analysis, every amount in the financial or income statement is expressed as a percentage of another amount. Thus, in the assets column, each value is shown as a percentage of the total value of all assets combined. In horizontal analysis, values on the balance sheet over past years are compared with each other. Balance sheet. Balance sheets are the most important aspect of accounts handling, management, and calculation. The end result of the analysis of an organization's success is achieved out of the tallying amounts of their balance sheet. Now we shall understand the estimation of fixed capital requirements. Cost of fixed assets. Fixed assets like building, plant, and machinery, furniture, etc. form a major proportion of total capital requirements, mainly in capital-intensive industries. These assets are permanent assets. Cost of current assets. Current assets include stock in trade, debtors, and bills receivable, cash and bank balance, etc. Sufficient amount of current assets is required for the smooth functioning of the business. Promotional expenses. Promotional expenses are incurred in formation and incorporation of company. Promotional expenses is not fixed and therefore is not easy to be estimated. Cost of financing. Cost of financing includes expenses on the procurement of capital fund. These expenses include expenses of drafting and printing of prospectus and application forms, expenses on advertising, underwriting commission, brokerage, and other expenses on the marketing securities. Cost of intangible assets. A new company sometimes has to acquire goodwill patent rights from an existing company. These expenses should also be taken into account while estimating the capital requirement of a new company. Cost of a developing business. The operating loss likely to be incurred in the initial stage of its operation or before it reaches break-even point, no profit, no loss line, is the cost of developing the business. A good financial plan should also include this cost, also in estimating the capital requirement of a new company. Fixed capital and its determinants. Fixed capital is that portion of the capital which is represented by the fixed assets such as building, plant and machinery, furniture, etc. Fixed assets are also known as block capital because it is blocked up in fixed assets for a fairly long time. Nature of business. An industrial or a public utility concern requires a large amount of the fixed capital as compared to a trading concern. Type of manufacturing process. Processing, analytical and synthetically, industries require a large amount of fixed capital than assembly and service industries. Scale of operation. A large-scale manufacturing unit requires a larger amount of fixed capital than an industrial unit carrying on its operation on a small scale. Mode of acquiring fixed assets. Mode of acquiring fixed assets determines the need of fixed capital. A firm may acquire asset on cash-down basis, outright purchase for cash, or on hire purchase or installment basis. Technique of production. The technique of production also affects the total requirements of fixed capital. In estimating working capital needs, different people adopt different approaches. Some experts suggest that the working capital should be greater than the minimum requirements of the firm. There are various approaches which have been applied in practice for estimating the working capital needs of a firm. Conservative approach. The conservative approach states that the proportion of current assets to current liabilities should be kept 2-to-1. The limitation of this approach is that it suggests only quantitative measure. It does not suggest as to what type of assets are to be included in current assets. Components approach. The method adopted here attempts at estimation of working capital and its components by taking into account the period for which the various items remain as stock or as outstanding, the cost structure of production and annual production. Operating cycle approach. It was earlier referred to as working capital. It is also known as revolving capital, that is, a circular path of conversion-reconversion takes place. The 5 most common sources of short-term working capital financing are equity. These funds might be injected from personal resources or from a family member, a friend, or a third-party investor. Trade creditors. The trade creditor will want proof of the order and may want to file a lien on it as security. But if it enables one to proceed, that should not be a problem. Factoring. Factoring is another resource for short-term working capital financing. Once an order is filled, a factoring company buys the account receivable and then handles the collection. Line of credit. Lines of credit are not often given by banks to new businesses. A line of credit allows borrowing funds for short-term needs when they arise. Short-term loan. While new business may not qualify for a line of credit from a bank, one might have success in obtaining a one-time short-term loan, less than a year, to finance the temporary working capital needs. Here we will discuss about identifying the sources of finance. Startup businesses often have a difficult time finding sources of startup business financing for their initial financing needs. Here are the most likely sources of startup financing for new business. Bootstrapping. Bootstrapping requires serious strategic thinking and planning. Raising funds may involve pledging own assets. Since the largest asset most people have is their home, one may find oneself in the position of taking out a home equity loan on home. One only wants to do this if one has an ironclad business plan, as pledging home is not something that should be done casually. Financing with the help of family and friends. The good thing about financing startup business with the help of family and friends is that one can often get fairly lenient repayment terms. That may be important in the initial years of new business. Small Business Administration. Small Business Administration, SBA, does not make loans to startup businesses, but they guarantee a portion of loans startup businesses applied for through banks, insurance companies, and pension funds. This makes it easier for startups to secure bank loans when otherwise the banks would not be willing to loan the money. SBIR and SBTT government grants. Small Business Innovation Research Grants, SBIR, and Small Business Technology Transfer Grants, SBTT, are wonderful sources of financing for small business if one can qualify for them. SBTT grants have the same Phase 1 and Phase 2 grant procedure. Only 5 federal agencies offer SBTT grants. In order to qualify for SBTT grant, one must be teamed up with some sort of nonprofit organization like a university. Angel investors. Angel investing is a type of equity financing. Angel investors typically do not make really large investments, so the percentage of ownership may not be large. Often, however, angel investors are interested in having input in how the company is operated. Internal financing. Sources of equity. The first potential source of funds is any equity financing that may have overlooked. Equity includes personal funds invested in the business, most commonly personal savings, as well as retained earnings, which is the money that is reinvested in the business after expenses are subtracted from revenues. Other internal sources. There are other internal options for financing the growth of the business that will not negatively affect the debt-to-equity ratio. External financing. When deciding between potential sources of external financing, consider a provider's operations within the country, their effectiveness, and own experience or connection with these institutions. While it is important to research and be informed of all options, avoid too much shopping around with potential lenders. Do not spend hours discussing the business with them and drawing up documents only to back out because one has found potentially better terms elsewhere. As well, remember that lender is in competition with other lending institutions. And once one has established a good relationship with a lender, they will want to retain one as a customer. Sources of loans. Borrowing from local banks instead of foreign institutions usually has some strong advantages, when possible, and might prove useful for certain parts of a business's transactions, in particular where warehouse receipt-based lending is offered. International social lenders, on the other hand, may prove best for providing unsecured harvest financing, sufficient export credit, or trade finance. Because they are lending for social rather than economic reasons, they will sometimes offer better rates, lower collateral requirements, and will be more flexible when determining a repayment structure. Collateral. Collateral can take the form of property such as land, buildings, raw materials, finishing goods, stocks, or other assets such as receivables. Collateral serves as protection for the lender against loan default by the borrower. In the event that a borrower does not repay the loan, the lender is able to seize the assets pledged as collateral and use the proceeds from selling the assets to repay the loan. The most common collateral types accepted by the lenders listed in the marketplace are real property, sales contracts, deposit certificates, and guarantees. Guarantees. Guarantee funds exist to help specific types of businesses obtain access to financing in spite of a lack of sufficient collateral. Because some guarantee funds may not work with some lenders, one should determine if it will need a third party's guarantee to provide sufficient collateral before one approaches potential lenders. Guarantees tend to vary in terms of the amount of risk they will accept, the duration of loans for which they will supplement collateral, and the types of borrowers and lenders with whom they will work. It is as important to make sure that gives the same attention to the guarantee fund's requirements and expectations as one does to a potential lender. Now we shall understand the international financing institutions. International financial institutions, IFIs, are institutions that provide financial support via grants and loans for economic and social development activities in developing countries. International financial institutions include public banks, such as the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, and regional development banks. The 5 institutions of the World Bank are the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, IBRD, International Development Association, IDA, International Finance Corporation, IFC, Multilateral Guarantee Agency, MIGA, and International Center for the Settlement of Investment Disputes, ICSID. Established in 2006 by major donors, the UN and the World Bank, the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery, GFDRR, is a partnership with a mission to mainstream disaster risk reduction, DRR, and climate change adaptation, CCA, in country development strategies by supporting a country-led and managed implementation of the Hyogo Framework for Action, HFA. GFDRR has 3 main business lines to achieve its development objectives. Track 1. Partnership in Disaster Risk Reduction. Track 1 supports ISDR's global and regional processes to enable leveraging country resources for ex-ante investment in prevention, mitigation, and preparedness activities. The key objectives are to enhance global and regional advocacy, strategic partnerships, and knowledge management for mainstreaming disaster risk reduction, to promote the standardization and harmonization of hazard risk management tools, methodologies, and practices. Track 2. Mainstreaming disaster risk reduction. The Disaster Risk Reduction Mainstreaming Program, Track 2, provides ex-ante assistance to developing countries to mainstream and expand disaster risk reduction, DRR, and climate change adaptation, CCA activities. Under this business line, GFDRR works closely with the World Bank regional teams, UN agencies, and client governments to integrate DRR in national poverty reduction strategies and country development agendas. Track 3. Disaster Risk Reduction and Recovery. Track 3, or SRFF, adheres to a set of guiding principles and includes 2 financing windows. Window 1. The Technical Assistance TA Fund, to support damage, loss, and needs assessments and develop national capacity for recovery planning and implementation. Window 2. The Callable Fund for Accelerated Recovery, to provide speedy access to financial resources for disaster recovery and reconstruction. Let's now have a look on venture capital funding. Venture capital is the fund initial capital provided to businesses typically as a startup stage and many times for new untested ideas. Venture capital funds are mutual funds that manage venture capital money. That is, these funds aggregate money from several investors who want to provide venture capital and deploy this money in venture capital opportunities. The National Venture Capital Association defines venture capital as money provided by professionals who invest alongside management in young, rapidly growing companies that have the potential to develop into significant economic contributors. Some of the unique features of a VC firm are investment in high-risk, high-returns ventures. As VCs invest in untested, innovative ideas, the investments entail high risks. In return, they expect a much higher return than usual. Internal rate of return expected is generally in the range of 25% to 40%. Participation in management. Besides providing finance, venture capitalists may also provide technical, marketing, and strategic support. To safeguard their investment, they may also at times expect participation in management. Expertise in managing funds. VCs generally invest in particular type of industries, or some of them invest in particular type of businesses, and hence have a prior experience and contacts in the specific industry, which gives them an expertise in better management of the funds deployed. Raises funds from several sources. In fact, VCs are not necessarily rich and almost always deal with funds raised mainly from others. The various sources of funds are rich individuals, other investment funds, pension funds, endowment funds, etc., in addition to their own funds, if any. Diversification of the portfolio. VCs reduce the risk of venture investing by developing a portfolio of companies, and the norm followed by them is same as a portfolio manager's, that is, not to put all the eggs in the same basket. Exit after specified time. VCs are generally interested in exiting from a business after a pre-specified period. This period may usually range from 3 to 7 years. Now in the end, let us summarize what we have learned in this lecture. The purpose of the plan also determines its length. If one wants to use the plan to seek millions of money in seed capital to start a risky venture, one may have to do a lot of explaining and convincing. Enterprise plans tend to have a lot of elements in common, like cash flow projections and marketing plans. Before approaching the capital market to collect finance, it is essential to determine or estimate the capital requirements of the company. The conservative approach states that the proportion of current assets to current liabilities should be kept 2 to 1. Efficient working capital management is one which ensures continuous flow without any interruptions, hold-ups, or any of the stages referred, and involves, as far as possible, a rapid completion of the revolutions.